As we approached 9:37, American Airlines Flight 77, which was hijacked, would strike the Pentagon. And as the general had spoken, he would penetrate the E ring and do damage to the D ring and further through the attack. I now want to introduce retired Captain Lynn O'Donnell, who was United Airlines.
Thank you, Dick, for all of this. I was home in New Jersey on that day, living 30 miles from New York City, scheduled to fly the next day on reserve, junior. My former mother-in-law called up to ask, "Are you watching the TV? Are you watching the news?" It was about 9 o'clock. I had already turned it off. She said, "Turn it on." She was worried that my husband, her son, and a friend who was ferrying an airplane across the country, she was worried about him because she'd heard that a small airplane had hit the World Trade Center. I turned on the TV, quickly saw it was not a small airplane. Though I have to say I thought it was a 737. That's just how big those twin towers are. It was actually a 767. Like everybody else, I stood staring at the TV in total disbelief. And like everybody else, I was completely stunned by what I saw on the screen. Now, on TV, everything's contained, it's small, it's flat, it's maybe real, it's not. I couldn't really grasp what I was looking at. So I got in the car and I went into town to the top of a hill where I could see the New York City skyline. One tower was gone and the other was smoking. And then it was real, very, very real. I have to admit, I filled up my car and bought some water and went home because I thought, I didn't know what the immediate future would be for the area. We'd always known New York City was a target. As the day progressed, more was known. I found out it was 2 United airplanes and 2 American airline airplanes that were involved. I soon figured out, knowing flight numbers and schedules and so on, that the 2 airplanes were piloted by New York-based crews. And knowing that made a horrible, horrible day that much worse. All but 1 year of my life at United, I was also a New York-based pilot on the 767 fleet. New York, unlike other bases, was small. We all knew each other. In the larger bases, you could fly for months or years and never fly with the same crew twice. But we flew each other pretty routinely. We knew their families, we knew who had kids, we knew who was having troubles with marriages or selling their house and so on. So it was more family than just colleagues. Several of these pilots lived in southeast Pennsylvania, down in the Bucks County area. It was kind of a pilot conclave. They would bid trips so they could fly to drive into work together. They were very active in social committees and social things down there. And many of the other pilots based in New York, like me, lived locally. I also commuted in with somebody who lived in my area. It was that kind of, quite an anomaly for an airline of that size. So Flight 75, the 767 that hit the South Tower, Captain Vic Saraceni, one of the Bucks County crowd, just a super guy to fly with, left behind a wife and daughter. His first officer, Michael Horrocks, former Marine, part of the PA crowd, described as a great dad, left behind wife and 2 kids. Flight attendants on that flight were Boston-based. Robert Fangman, Amy Jarrett, Catherine Labori, Al Marchand, who surprisingly was a retired police lieutenant, who took an FA job, flight attendant job, on a whim, and found out that he loved it. He'd only been with the company a short time. Alicia Titus and Michael Toro. Now we come to the heroes of Flight 93, that doomed flight known for the bravery of the passengers and the flight attendants. Having heard that 2 other planes had hit the World Trade Center, The passengers and flight attendants tried to overtake the hijackers, sacrificing themselves, trying to ensure that Flight 93 didn't have the same fate as Flight 11 and United 175. It is known from the cockpit voice recorder that the pilots struggled and fought with the hijackers, but lost to the box cutters those cowards carried. But here's the thing. As pilots, we were trained in hijack situations. We had studied previous hijacking scenarios. We had security briefings. We knew who Osama bin Laden was. They had foiled a plot of his to take down 10 airplanes over the Pacific a few years earlier. That plot was thwarted. This one was not. What we had not trained for and never envisioned was suicidal hijackers, a whole new paradigm. Though they fought and struggled, they were simply not equipped to fight them off. Captain Jason Dahl, he wasn't supposed to be on that flight today. He had picked up the trip so that he could have time off later in the week. For his 5th wedding anniversary, he'd planned to surprise his wife with a piano and a day at the spa, and they were going to leave on a 3-day trip to London. So he picked up this trip in order to do that. His first officer, Leroy Homer, Air Force Academy grad, described as just a really cool guy. I didn't know him. Jason's wife, Sandy, 10 years later, struggling to cope with the images and loss of that day, we lost her too, and I count her among the victims, though she's not counted in the losses. And I wonder, Chuck, how many other families have a situation like that?